Ego is the antidote that dilutes the mind from the pain that is already there. Let's unpack that for a little bit. My therapist told me that yesterday, and it just been stuck with me. She says, Paul, look at this note that I wrote down. She says that ego is the antidote that dilutes the mind from the pain that's already there. And as you unpack that, you immediately begin to think about the bully. You ever heard of like someone talk about their villain story? A moment in their life that they were hurt that triggered their villain story where they became like a bad person or an egotistical person. Um, and as we unpack that, I begin to find where that same story can translate for all of us. What is your ego story or your quote unquote villain story? For example, for me, it was the people pleasing and the helping others, right? And I will go out my way to help everybody. And think about the saying now that the ego is the antidote that dilutes the pain that is already there. And the reason why I had to help everybody is it fed an ego. It fed something that made me feel good about myself. That they would say, "Oh, Paul is always there. Oh, Paul, man, Paul this and Paul that. He's always there when you need him." That fed something in me that was validating and need to feel good about myself. And the pain that was already there part is stuff that you may not even remember. It may be stuff that exists in you that you thought you got over or you forgive. When I hear a lot of people talk about you got to move on, you can't hold on to your past, that is so true. But for a lot of people, moving on is tapping into your past to address the effects of the body from that past situation in order to move on. So it's kind of like a catch 22 thing for some people, where it may be true for some, it may not be true for others. And for a lot of people, especially when trauma is involved, in order to truly move on, because you can forgive, you can forget, you can move on, but the effects of that trauma you will carry. And you can never, ever truly 100% move on because your body is holding on to those effects. And it will come out in situations where you didn't even realize it. Some people comes out in road rage. Some people comes out in a child where the child says or does something, and then all of a sudden you're triggered and you're acting out of character because you're taking on, your body took on that situation in that moment, as well as something that was triggered from childhood. So you have, coupled with that moment, you have a million other moments or a very traumatic moment and the effects of that on top of that moment. And then you're overreacting, or you're manic and you can't control your emotions, or you cannot control your anxiety. And the importance of recognizing and realizing that we allow sometimes our ego to cover up those moments by, for some people, being arrogant and I don't need therapy, I got this, I move on, forget about the past and I move forward. And a lot of times it's ego. For me, it's people pleasing. It's always trying to be a version for that person that they need. And what that does is this complete neglect of self, this complete neglect of identity, this complete neglect of what may be best for me in a moment, where what may be best for me may not be to help you in that particular moment. And this complete neglect of self, because I'm feeding an ego that I'm showing up for you the way you want me to, and I'm showing up for others the way they want me to. And what happens is you neglect yourself and you lose your identity. So there's so much to unpack with that one statement. You're unpacking your identity, you're unpacking your ego, you're unpacking childhood trauma. There's so much to unpack in that. So as you play this video back, listen to that statement again and just unpack it in all the different levels that may exist in your own life and in your own walk. And I'm unpacking that this week personally, and even sharing with you how it affects me, right? And being vulnerable in this so that you can see that, hey, you know what? My villain story doesn't not necessarily have to be a bad guy. Good guys, right, in that statement, realize that your ego story, or I won't even call it villain story. What is your ego story? Is it the good guy mode where I need to be the good guy for everyone? Is it the bad guy mode? Well, you know what? I'm putting up all of these walls because I've been hurt or whatever. And just one last thing before I go. Remember, some of these hurts you may not even remember. And as I unpacked it with my therapist, some of the things that came up in that, I didn't even know was there. It was memories that came back up in the process of connecting a recent feeling of being overwhelmed. And then that feeling was tied back to something that happened at an age that I was so young I couldn't even remember the age. But the feeling exists, and the feeling brought back the memory. And as I was able to unpack that, I realized I'm not who I thought I was all these years, with the anxiety and with the things, and learning to unpack and release and let go. So again, moving forward, for some people, especially in the case of trauma and PTSD, moving forward may be under the guide of a professional, where you can kind of go back and unpack these triggers and not carry these triggers with you. And that's what moving forward looks like for a lot of us out there. Moving forward means getting under the guise of a professional and unpacking and reversing some triggers and effects on the bodies. And that way we do not carry it, because none of us wants to carry it. And a lot of us, we let go of it. But we're still carrying it. Our body is carrying it. Your mind and your reason and your logic have let go. Your heart, you have let go. But your body is still flesh. You can let go spiritually, even as a believer, and you can forgive, but your body is still flesh. It's still in the flesh. It's still holding on to things that will be triggered. And you have to learn how to process that and find the root. And once you find the root, it's easier for you to move forward in letting go and in moving forward. So with that said, I would say that phrase one last time, process that, how it may be relevant to you in your ego journey. And that is, ego is the antidote, right? Ego is the antidote that dilutes the pain that is already there.